Hi everyone, today I have with me Jeff Seaman, co-director of the Babson Survey Research Group, the group that releases an annual study about trends in online learning for colleges and universities. Jeff will be speaking at our upcoming event, New Directions in Online Learning, which is happening March 31st through April 2nd in Boston. Jeff, welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
We're happy to have you as well. So diving in right now, you guys have been tracking trends in online learning with your annual report for more than a decade now. I know your report this year came out only a few weeks ago. So can you talk about the big trends you've seen in your decade plus of research?
Yes, I think for us the big issue has always been that there's been two sets of indicators we've been looking. So 12 years looking, and so there's the continually increasing, continually more positive story about online that you see, and that's things like enrollment, that people are saying that the perceived level of quality of the learning outcomes every year gets a little bit better. More and more of the institutions say it's important for their long-term strategy every year. So for a decade plus, we've seen this class of indicators that show slow but steady improvement that always are putting online in a bit better light, a bit more popular, a bit more accepted. And then there's the stubborn that never change piece. And for that, there's a subset of institutions who have always said, it doesn't matter to me, it's not important to me, it doesn't match my mission, I have no interest in it, I don't believe in it, it's no good. They are unwavering in that belief and have been for over a decade. But then even among the institutions for which there are large online programs, there's still levels of concern that have not gone away. The two biggest are faculty acceptance of online and retention of students in online programs.
Okay, that's
seeing continual resistance to them for the entire 12 years.
Yeah, wow. Those are a lot of big topics to dive into. One of the things I want to specifically ask about, one of the things that I think was making the rounds this year after your report was released a few weeks ago, was that this year's report showed that online learning saw the lowest growth rate since you began collecting data. So while the growth rate still outpaces, as you mentioned in the report, higher education enrollments in general, it seems to potentially signal the slowing down of an industry that's otherwise been growing pretty rapidly in the past decade. So given all this, what does this new reality mean in terms of how universities and the administrators specifically should strategize around online learning?
Absolutely. This is actually, from the very beginning, from the report number 2, the question was, is this growth sustainable? And the answer has always been no. I mean, if you extrapolate it out 20 years, you got more than 100% taking online. Obviously impossible. So the question has always been, when do you see the plateau, and where do you see it? It's a more interesting piece, because you don't expect, or I don't expect, that it's going to be universal, that enrollments are going to slow the same for all types of programs at all types of levels simultaneously. We'll begin to see that pattern emerge over time. And that's what we're beginning to see now, that online, at least in some components of higher ed, is reaching this sort of equilibrium state, the steady state where it's no longer growing, but it's not shrinking. You've got some programs that are growing a little, others dropping a little bit, but that pattern is not universal across all of online. So what we love now is to delve into and start looking at, well, where is it beginning to level out, where not, where do we see those kinds of things, and it does differ by program.
Okay. Another slight decrease that I wanted to address from this year's report was the number of academic leaders who described online learning as critical to their institution's long-term strategy. So that number was 69% in 2013. In this year's report, it was 66%. So what do you think this suggests for the popularity and prominence of online learning in the years ahead?
It's a really interesting number, and it's not so much because of the number. And this is the biggest drop we've seen in that. Basically, this has been one of those continually increasing indicators that we've had for all of the years. So the fact that it went down, 3 approximate percent is big news, because it hadn't been doing that for forever. But the way in which it went down is the really interesting piece, which is among all the institutions that have online and have any kind of program, or even just a course, a tube, not even a fully online program, their opinion did not change. They are exactly as positive about online, as important for the strategy as ever. It's all those schools that don't yet have online, that a sizable proportion of them have been saying, we're going to move to online, and they're changing their mind. And they're a very interesting group of schools. They tend to be very small. They have not done a lot in online primarily because of resource issues. They wanted to do it but didn't have the resources to do it. And now they're beginning to either, and I don't know the reason, I mean, you could speculate, maybe it's because they see that the market's mature and there's no longer any opportunity. Maybe they're just getting tired of it. Maybe they're seeing that all the publicity about MOOCs is souring the market. At this point it's speculative. But it's really interesting because if you have online, you are just as positive on every measure this year as you were last year. Okay. If you don't have online, you're more negative this year than you were last year.
Okay. All right. Speaking of MOOCs, I should say, that's the last thing I wanted to kind of hone in on with you. It's been one of the big buzzwords in higher ed, most generally, not just online higher ed, in the last few years. And this year's report talks about how, of the ones that you surveyed, which I know accounts for over 80% of schools, that only 5% are offering MOOCs and just under 10% were in the planning stages. So given that there's all this buzz out there and all this talk about MOOCs, do those numbers surprise you or any other people that you come
No, because there's a couple of things. One is MOOCs are such a high leverage activity. Obviously the massive part of the M in the MOOC, the saturation of MOOCs doesn't need 4,500 institutions offering them. So the fact that we have 5% of them only offering them, that's still a fairly large number, and if they're, especially what they are, tend to be much more of the bigger institutions with the resources to do this, that their reach, the number of potential students they get, is quite high. If we doubled or tripled that number, we wouldn't substantially increase the potential reach. There's enough offerings, there's enough pieces out there. The difference is, what's the impact on higher ed community writ large? What we're seeing is the MOOC impact is going to be on a small slice of higher ed, at least directly, and the rest of the institutions are just going to have the indirect effects of whatever the reputation issues for MOOCs are, what that impacts how people think about higher ed and things, but not directly by having their own programs.